Welcome, dear listener. Tonight I invite you to step into a world of secrets, shadows, and elegant crimes, the kind only Hercule Poirot can unravel. This isn't just another bedtime story. This is a mystery you'll try to solve, but won't be able to guess until the very end. So whether you're lying in bed, dimming the lights, or simply looking for a world to escape into, let the rain, the whispers, and the ticking of a distant clock guide you through this night. Get comfortable. Close your eyes. The game of little grey cells is about to begin. This is the Midnight Masquerade. The Midnight Masqueradea Hercule Poirot, a mystery. Chapter 1. The Invitation. The rain had been falling since morning, a steady, misting drizzle that turned the pavements of London into dull grey mirrors. In the sitting room of his apartment, Poirot sat perfectly upright in an armchair, the tips of his fingers pressed lightly together, his eyes fixed on the ticking of the small ormolu clock on the mantel. To anyone else, it was an ordinary Thursday afternoon. To Poirot, it was a puzzle waiting to begin. There came a knock at the door, a polite, crisp sound, neither hesitant nor hurried. Hastings rose to answer, but Poirot, with that delicate lift of his eyebrow, spoke softly. "No, mon ami, allow me. It is always important to observe the messenger." At the threshold stood a footman dressed in black livery, holding a single envelope the colour of midnight. The edges were lined with silver filigree, and the wax seal bore the emblem of Ravenscar Manor, a sprawling estate on the edge of Yorkshire moors. The footman inclined his head, placed the envelope on a silver tray, and departed without a word. "Très dramatique," Poirot murmured, turning the envelope between his fingers. One would think it is an invitation to the theatre of crime itself. The note inside was handwritten in an elegant, looping script. "Monsieur Poirot, you are cordially invited to the midnight masquerade at Ravenscar Manor on the 14th of October. Your presence is requested not merely for festivity, but for matters of utmost delicacy and importance. Sincerely, Lady Helena Ashcroft." Hastings frowned. "Midnight masquerade. Sounds like quite the party. What does she mean by matters of delicacy?" Poirot's moustache twitched, the way it always did when intrigue had entered the room. "My dear Hastings, when a lady writes to Hercule Poirot of delicate matters, it is seldom about dancing. No, something is already in motion." He stood, adjusted the fold of his pocket square, and with immaculate precision placed the invitation inside his coat. "We shall go, mon ami. Where there is elegance, there is vanity, and where there is vanity—" He paused, eyes glinting. "There is often crime." The train to Yorkshire the following evening was crowded with guests dressed in cloaks and evening attire, their chatter floating down the corridor like wisps of champagne bubbles. Hastings looked out at the fog-smeared fields, while Poirot remained still, studying the guests with an almost feline patience. A young heiress laughed too brightly. A gentleman with a hawk-like nose kept glancing over his shoulder. A woman in opera gloves whispered to her companion, with the intensity of someone protecting a secret. "You're watching them as if the crime's already happened," Hastings whispered. "My non," Poirot replied softly. "I am watching them because the crime is already alive." The train arrived at Ravenscar Station under a silver moon, half shrouded in mist. A row of black carriages waited outside, their lamps glowing faintly in the fog. Beyond the fields, the silhouette of Ravenscar Manor loomed against the night sky, spires, turrets, and ancient stone wrapped in mist like a phantom of its own making. As they approached the manor, Hastings caught the distant echo of a clock tower striking 10. The ball was to begin at midnight. The air was colder here, heavy with the scent of rain and secrets. Poirot stepped from the carriage, brushed an invisible speck from his lapel, and murmured, "This, Hastings, is a house that remembers its sins." And somewhere inside Ravenscar Manor, a murderer was already waiting. Chapter 2. Ravenscar Manor. The carriage creaked along the narrow, twisting road that led up to Ravenscar Manor. The fog had thickened, blurring the world into shades of charcoal and pearl. Hastings peered out of the window and saw only the suggestion of hedgerows and the occasional flicker of a lantern. The rhythmic clop of the horses' hooves echoed like a heartbeat in the night. As the carriage turned the last bend, the manor emerged from the mist, Ravenscar Manor was a house that did not merely stand on the moor, it brooded there. Tall grey stone walls were veined with ivy, and towers rose like dark spires against the cloudy moon. Windows, narrow and tall, glimmered faintly from within, each light more like a watching eye than a welcome. At the very top a clock tower loomed, its hands frozen just short of midnight. "If you ask me, Poirot," Hastings whispered, "this place looks like it's waiting to swallow us whole." "Mais oui, mon ami," Poirot replied softly, adjusting his coat with precision. "It is most obliging of a house to tell you at once that it keeps secrets." The carriage rolled to a stop before the great oak doors, which opened as if on cue. A butler in a tailcoat stepped forward, pale and stiff, like a figure cut from marble. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," he intoned. "Lady Helena is expecting you." The grand hall of Ravenscar Manor was awash in golden lamplight and velvet shadows. A chandelier glittered overhead like a captured constellation, its light reflected in the polished black and white marble floor. A long red carpet led toward a sweeping staircase. At its top, like a queen awaiting her court, Lady Helena Ashcroft stood. She was a woman of striking presence. Tall, silver hair swept into an elegant twist, her gown a deep garnet velvet that caught the light like spilled wine. On her face a half-mask of black lace. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice smooth as silk, "you honor us." Poirot bowed slightly. "Madame, it is you who honors Hercule Poirot. I am most curious to learn why a detective is summoned to so fine a party." Her smile flickered, for a heartbeat, with something almost like fear. "All in good time, monsieur. But tonight, please, enjoy the evening. Midnight will reveal what it must." And with that she turned to greet another guest, her trailing gown whispering across the marble like a warning. The guest, as the night deepened, more carriages arrived, and the guests poured into the grand hall. Each wore elaborate masks, feathers, silks, gold filigree. Laughter drifted beneath the high ceilings, but beneath it ran a quiet current of tension, as though every smile was stretched just a bit too thin. Hastings noted the key figures: Dr. Giles Ashcroft, Lady Helena's younger brother. His sharp grey eyes missed nothing. His mask, fittingly, was shaped like a raven. He held his glass of champagne as if it were a weapon. Veronica Vale, the opera singer, a vision in ivory silk with a plume of black feathers at her temple. Her laugh was soft, but her gaze lingered too long on Helena. Charles Davenport, a financier with a wolf's grin behind a golden mask. Whispers followed him like a shadow. He was engaged to Amelia Clark, young and beautiful, with a nervous smile and a delicate swan mask. Her gloved hands fidgeted constantly at the hem of her dress. Inspector Grant, in plain black attire, who pretended to be another guest, but Poirot recognized the weight of a revolver beneath his coat. And lastly, there was someone. The jester. Unlike the others, this figure moved through the crowd silently, mask grinning, bells jingling faintly. No one seemed to know who they were, and yet they always seemed to be listening. "Quite the gallery of suspects," Hastings murmured. "Non, non, mon ami," Poirot replied softly. "We are not yet at the crime, but already the story is telling itself." As the orchestra began to play a slow waltz, Poirot noticed Lady Helena glance toward the clock tower window, just as the wind howled outside. Midnight was drawing near, and so was the storm. Chapter 3. The Ball Begins. The clock in the great hall chimed 11. A soft waltz curled through the air like smoke, gentle at first, then swelling with violins that trembled against the walls. The masquerade was in full bloom. The grand chandelier gleamed brighter now, its 1,000 crystals throwing light in spinning circles across the marble floor. Masks sparkled. Laughter floated up the staircase. But beneath it all was something quieter. The faint hum of unease. Poirot moved through the crowd like a shadow in a world of gold. Every guest was wrapped in layers of silk and secrets. Some danced, some whispered, some lingered at the edges, where the light didn't reach as easily. Hastings, less subtle, found himself staring at the masks. "You know, Poirot," he muttered, "I can't tell who's who in this place. It's as if everyone's hiding behind some sort of lie." Poirot's moustache gave a delicate twitch, But of course, Hastings, that is precisely the purpose of a mask. It is not to conceal the face, it is to reveal the soul. Lady Helena floated through the ballroom with a calm, practiced grace. She greeted guests with champagne laughter, but Poirot noticed her fingers trembled each time the orchestra paused between movements. Her eyes, sharp behind the lace mask, flicked again and again toward the clock tower window above the stairs. She fears something, Poirot whispered to himself. Or perhaps someone. Giles Ashcroft stood near the bar, shoulders tense, the raven mask casting a long shadow across his face. Veronica Vale hovered by the piano, her gloved fingers tracing the rim of her glass, her eyes fixed on Lady Helena. Charles Davenport laughed too loudly, and Amelia Clark kept looking toward the door, as if hoping someone else would arrive. And then there was the jester. The figure in the jester's costume drifted between groups like smoke. They never spoke. They only listened, bells on their cap chiming softly with each step. Their mask, a frozen grin, was painted with black diamonds around the eyes. When Hastings turned to point them out to Poirot, they were gone. The waltz ended, and Lady Helena stepped onto the staircase, her figure framed beneath the clock tower arch. She raised a gloved hand and the murmurs fell away. "My dear friends," she said, voice clear and steady, "tonight Ravenscar welcomes you to the midnight masquerade, a tradition that has stood for nearly a century. You have come masked, as all must, but before this night is through, truth will have its dance." The guests laughed nervously. Poirot tilted his head. "Interesting choice of words," he murmured. She continued, "At midnight, we shall unmask and toast the future of Ravenscar Manor. Until then, my friends, dance, drink, and remember, not every mask is worn on the face." A thunderclap rolled through the moors as if on cue. The wind rattled the window panes, and several guests looked up uneasily. As the orchestra struck up a new tune, Poirot slipped quietly toward the edges of the ballroom. His eyes caught a few things others missed. A torn crimson ribbon snagged on a pillar near the staircase, a gold cufflink glinting beneath a velvet chair, a feather, black as midnight, resting at the foot of the steps. He bent to pick it up, rolling it gently between his fingertips. "Someone is already writing their confession," he whispered. "Confession? What are you on about?" Hastings asked, frowning. Poirot simply smiled that small, infuriating smile of his. "Patience, mon ami. Murder is a performance, and this," he gestured to the ballroom, "is only the overture." The night grew heavier with each minute. The rain outside lashed the windows. The orchestra played faster now, as if trying to drown out something that was creeping closer. Somewhere behind the curtain near the grand staircase, someone whispered hurriedly. Poirot turned his head sharply. The clock hands in the tower above ticked toward midnight, and somewhere in the crowd, the murderer waited. Chapter 4. Midnight. The clock tower began to chime. Not loudly, not sharply, but with that deep sonorous weight that seems to bend the air around it. 1, 2, 3. Midnight. For a heartbeat, all movement stilled. Even the rain seemed to hesitate. Lady Helena stood once more at the top of the staircase, her garnet gown a sweep of velvet against the pale stone. She lifted her glass, her lace mask casting soft shadows across her face. Below the guests gathered, their own masked faces tilted upward like an audience waiting for a final act. "Midnight," she said simply, her voice carried, soft but clear. "And as tradition commands, we unmask." She lowered her glass. A soft rustle passed through the room as hands lifted to faces, silk gloves brushing against velvet ribbons, gold ties being undone, feathers slipping from pins. Laughter rippled lightly, a sound that did not quite reach the ceiling. But Lady Helena did not move. She remained perfectly still at the top of the stairs, her hand resting on the rail, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond the crowd, her mask still on, her glass slipping slightly in her fingers, and then very quietly she swayed. No one screamed at first. She did not fall dramatically. She folded almost gently like a flower bowing its head at night. The glass left her hand and rolled down the steps, spilling pale champagne like a trail of gold. It wasn't until her body struck the marble floor with a soft, final sound that someone gasped. The orchestra stopped mid-note. The jesters' bells jingled once somewhere near the rear of the room, and then silence fell like a sheet of ice. Amelia Clark dropped her mask. Veronica Vale pressed a hand to her throat. Giles Ashcroft did not move at all, his eyes fixed, unblinking, on his sister. "Good Lord," Hastings whispered, "is she—" Poirot was already moving. Not running, never that. He glided through the still, fragile air with purpose, his polished shoes barely making a sound against the marble. He knelt beside Lady Helena. His hand, precise and calm, pressed gently to her wrist. Nothing. Her eyes were half open, her mask tilted askew. A thin ribbon of blood traced a single line down the inside of her arm, delicate, almost elegant. At her side, just near her hand, lay a black feather, identical to the one Poirot had found earlier. "She is dead," Poirot said softly. And in that single quiet sentence the room seemed to fracture. The whispers began, hushed, frantic. Was it the fall? No, look at her arm. Who was nearest the staircase? My God, at midnight. Inspector Grant pushed through the guests and joined Poirot at the body. Good God, he muttered. This was supposed to be a party, not a performance. Poirot finished for him quietly. But you see, Inspector, the performance has merely changed genre. The inspector bent closer, his brow furrowed. Poirot's gaze moved beyond the body and to the staircase. Fair smear of something faint, as wine perhaps or blood, marked the third step from the bottom. And near the banister, a silken ribbon torn and crumpled. Hastings stood a few paces away, pale. Poirot, do you think— Non, mon ami, Poirot interrupted gently. I do not think yet. I observe. Lady Helena's mask was carefully removed. Her face, once so commanding, now seemed fragile, almost weightless. Poirot's eyes swept over every detail, the faint puncture near her wrist, the elegant placement of the feather, the angle of the fall. This was not a clumsy act. This was deliberate, calculated, and somewhere in the ballroom, among the murmuring, among the guests lowering their masks, the murderer was standing very, very still. The clock chimed one last time. The wind rattled the windows, and Poirot, rising slowly to his feet, spoke softly. No one is to leave Ravenscar Manor. Chapter 5. Lockdown at the Manor. For a long, brittle moment after Poirot's quiet pronouncement, no one spoke. The rain answered instead, needling the tall casement windows, turning the panes to wavering mirrors that reflected a ballroom of pale faces and loosened masks. Inspector Grant recovered first. "Mr. Keene," he said to the butler, whose composure had cracked only at the edges, "close and bolt the front doors. Post a man at the service entrance. No guest leaves the premises, no servant either." Mr. Keene bowed, his hands steady despite the tremor at his mouth. "At once, sir." He moved with a grave efficiency that suggested long practice at containing disorder, and in a few moments the great oak doors boomed shut, their iron bolts sliding home with a sound like finality. A footman drew the drapes over the tall windows. Another carried the shocked Amelia Clark to a chaise, where the housekeeper, Mrs. Whitlow, pressed smelling salts to her nose and murmured that all would be well. Though her own eyes were red-rimmed with fright, Poirot remained by Lady Helena. He did not hover or fidget. He observed. His fingertips hovered for a moment above the faint puncture near the wrist, then moved to the black feather, which he lifted delicately and slipped into an envelope produced as if from the air. "Captain Hastings," he said softly without looking up, "you will indulge me and make a little list. Names of every guest, full names if you please. The orchestra, too, and the household staff under their positions." Hastings, grateful for purpose, pulled a small notebook from his pocket. "Yes, of course. Add to the list," Poirot continued, "where each person stood at the moment of midnight. The eyes of the outraged are not always reliable, but they are suggestive." Inspector Grant straightened, scanning the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice carrying, "please remain in the hall. We will require statements. Until further notice, the manor is under police authority." A murmur swept the guests. Giles Ashcroft, his raven mask now discarded, revealing a face set in hard lines, stepped forward. "Inspector, this is my sister's house. I will not have it treated like a barracks. Grant looked at him with a policeman's patience. I appreciate your loss, Dr. Ashcroft. My duty is clear. Giles's jaw worked as if on a bitter nut he could not crack. He turned away, and Poirot watched the movement with polite interest. There was a faint dark smear at the edge of Giles's right cuff. Ink? It had dried to a dull sheen. Across the room, Veronica Vale stood very still, one hand at her throat, her eyes fixed not on the body, but on the staircase. Giles Davenport had fallen uncharacteristically silent, his carnation askew. Amelia, pale but recovered, kept her gaze on the floor as if afraid the room itself would accuse her if she dared lift it. And somewhere, though no one could now point to where, the jester had vanished. Inspector, Mr. Keene returned. The doors are secured. I have posted Baines at the kitchen passage and Hook at the service court. The telephone in the housekeeper's room is, unfortunately, inoperative. The storm, sir. We have had trouble with the lines before. Grant swore softly. And the road? Flooded where the lane dips toward the village, Mr. Keene replied. The bridge over the beck will not be passable until morning. So, Poirot murmured, the stage is set in the classic manner. Grant glanced sideways. You sound almost pleased. Not pleased, Inspector. Relieved. Poirot's eyes flicked toward the shuttered windows. It is better to have all the actors kept snugly behind the curtain. He rose. Now, if we may have a little order of operations, the body must not be disturbed until your photographer arrives. Forgive me, there will be no photographer. Then we shall disturb it as little as possible. Mr. Keene, a sheet, if you please. Mrs. Whitlow, with solemn hands, produced a linen as white as confession, and together she and Poirot drew it over Lady Helena, leaving only the hand with the delicate puncture visible. Poirot's gaze lingered on the third stair, where that faint smear marked the stone. Wine? Hastings whispered. Perhaps, Poirot said, or the red that is not the wine. He straightened and spoke to Grant in a low voice. You perceive, Inspector. The fall is gentle, the wound is neat. A drama, yes, but a drama from the wrist inward. It suggests a thing administered, not a struggle. Grant nodded. Poison, or its cousin, delivered discreetly. Poirot's eyes dipped to the feather once more in its paper shroud. And the little calling card so theatrical. Place to be seen. We will not leap. We will step. Grant turned to the room. We'll begin with brief positions at midnight. Mr. Hastings will take notes. They went one by one, an orderly parade of alibis and hesitations. Giles Ashcroft claimed he stood at the foot of the stairs, 4 paces to the left of the carpet. Several guests agreed. He had not moved, they said. He had stared up as if struck into stone. Veronica Vale had been by the piano, her glass on the lid. I heard the last chime, she said, voice even. Then the glass rolled. I did not move at first. No one did. Charles Davenport swore he had been near the bar speaking to the orchestra's bandleader about an encore. The bandleader, a man with anxious eyebrows, confirmed, tentatively. Amelia Clark had drifted toward the entrance to the terrace to seek air. I felt faint, she murmured. I hadn't reached the door when Lady Helena... When she broke off, shivering. Inspector Grant had been near the centre, he admitted. Watching the room? That several guests confirmed with curious relief. Of the jester, accounts wavered. Some had seen the bells dancing near the gallery doors just before midnight. Another swore the figure stood directly beneath the stair. No one could be sure. The jester, it seemed, existed exactly where one did not look. Hastings scribbled, scratched out, underlined. Poirot watched him fondly, then addressed Mr. Keene. You will show me Lady Helena's study, Giles started. That is not necessary. But it is, Poirot said gently. When a person expects delicate matters at midnight, there is often a desk involved. His smile did not reach his eyes. We will be very careful, Dr. Ashcroft. Grant accompanied them, leaving the anxious company in Mrs. Whitlow's stern care. They crossed a shadowed corridor lined with ancestral portraits, ashen faces that looked disapprovingly at the living, and reached a heavy door. Mr. Keene produced a key and turned it. The study smelled of beeswax and paper. A coal fire had burned low in the grate. On the writing table, A blotter, a fountain pen uncapped, the ink shining still in the well, a small stack of parchment-toned paper banded with black ribbon, a silver letter knife, and a decanter with 2 clean glasses beside it. The arrangement was fastidious, almost Poirotian in its tidy symmetry. Poirot stepped to the desk and bent closer without touching. On the blotter, a ghostly copy of words had impressed the paper beneath. He tilted his head, tracing the pressed shapes with his eye. "Codicil," he murmured. "Ah," Giles made a sound in his throat. "I won't have—" "Please," Poirot said, and the single word was so courteous it might have been cruel. "No histrionics. We look only." Grant circled the room. "No sign of struggle," he said. "Window shut, latch secure." "Secure now," Poirot said softly. He touched, not the latch, but the stone sill just beyond it, where the smallest crescent of moisture darkened the pale ash. But at some time this evening it was opened. The air leaves a signature when it is in a hurry. Grant crossed to the hearth. "And this?" He lifted a small twist of blackened fibre from the fender. "Ribbon?" Poirot looked. The charred scrap had been crimson once. He glanced at Hastings' notebook memory of the ballroom. Torn crimson ribbon snagged near the stair. "There are many ribbons at a masquerade," he said. "It is their nature to be frivolous and to come loose." His gaze drifted to a low cabinet by the bookcase. Mr. Keene opened it at a word. Inside ledgers, a brass safe, and, perched with immodest innocence, a cardboard box labelled in a careful hand, "Plumes, black." He lifted the lid. Inside lay a fan with missing feathers and several loose black quills, one with a faint smudge at the quill end. "Accessories," Poirot murmured. "Or props." The wind heaved at the house and somewhere a door thudded in reply. Poirot looked toward the study's inner wall. A bookcase stood there, double-fronted, one shelf fractionally misaligned. He ran a fingertip along the seam, then, with a small satisfied sound, pressed a carved rosette. Nothing moved, then something did. A thin breath of colder air crept through the join. Grant's eyes sharpened. "A passage?" "A suggestion of one," Poirot said. "Ravenscar is a house that believes in tradition. In such houses, walls are sometimes not entirely honest." Giles' face had gone 2 degrees paler. "Those passages have been sealed for decades." "Of course," Poirot said pleasantly. "Sealed passages are very fashionable." He stepped back, leaving the bookcase as he had found it. "Inspector, for the present we do not poke the sleeping cat. We note where it naps." They returned to the hall. The orchestra had packed away their instruments under Mrs. Whitlow's unblinking supervision. Tea had appeared, because English catastrophe requires it, and cups trembled in saucers. Poirot took in the room as one takes in a chessboard after the first exchanges. Fewer pieces, clearer lines, more danger. He addressed the assembly with a courteous inclination. "Mesdames, Messieurs," he said, "we will trouble you only a little longer this night. The inspector will wish to speak to each of you briefly about what you saw at midnight and what you did in the hour before. In the morning we will be more thorough. For now you will remain to your rooms. You will not wander. You will not, how do you say, compare notes. The truth is a shy bird. When hunted in packs it takes to the thorns." Veronica's voice, soft and steady, floated back. "And if the truth is not shy, monsieur? If it is merely cruel?" Poirot's eyes for an instant were very old. "Then we will treat it with respect." Mr. Keene began to shepherd guests to the grand staircase. As they mounted, the clock gave a small, tired tick. Hastings leaned close. "Poirot, do you think the jester—" "Ah, the jester," Poirot said. "He danced where no one looked, and now he is not here at all. That is either because he is a magician, or because he is the simplest thing, a robe upon a peg, a costume. Perhaps in the wrong room," Poirot said mildly. "Or in the right one." He turned to Inspector Grant. "If you please, let us begin with Dr. Ashcroft and then Miss Vale. After that, Mr. Davenport and Mademoiselle Clark. Briefly tonight, yes. Tomorrow we shall speak with the patience of the saints." Grant nodded. "And you?" Poirot's gaze lifted toward the gallery, where the dark door to the east wing stood ajar by the width of a coin. "I," he said, "will take a little walk to see whether Ravenscar's sealed passages are very good at keeping their promises." The storm pressed close against the stone. Somewhere above, The bells that had jingled at midnight were silent now, and in the hush that followed the dispersal of 100 whispers, the house seemed to breathe once like a sleeper turning uneasily in a dream. Chapter 6. The Suspects Unmasked. The night had thinned to that grey hour before dawn when the house forgets its courage. Lamps glowed low in the morning room, where Inspector Grant had established a kind of field desk at a small escritoire. Mr. Keene produced tea that no one drank. The rain had calmed to a fine hiss. Poirot took a chair near the hearth, not quite in shadow, not quite in light. He arranged his gloves upon his knee and nodded to Grant. "Shall we begin, Inspector? Dr. Ashcroft, if you please." Giles entered with the carriage of a man who has braced for a blow and intends to endure it in silence. He took the straight-back chair across from Grant and set his hands upon his knees, knuckles pale. "Name," Grant said. "Tone neutral. Dr. Giles Jonathan Ashcroft. You are Lady Helena's brother." "I am." His mouth tightened. "I was." Grant made a brief note. "Your position at midnight?" "As I said, at the foot of the stairs, 4 paces left of the carpet." "Why left?" Poirot asked, as if idly curious. Giles looked at him, surprised. "Because there was already a little crowd to the right. The jester was there at one point, jingling like a blasted cat." "You disliked the jester?" Poirot inquired gently. "I dislike theatrics," Giles muttered. "This whole evening." He checked himself. Grant's pencil paused. "Your profession, Dr. Ashcroft?" "I kept the estate's medical accounts when my practice closed." A beat. There was not the need for a second physician in the village. And this evening, before midnight?" "In the study," Giles said curtly. "Helena wished to discuss certain documents." Poirot's eyes lowered, kind. "A codicil?" Giles's jaw ticked. She had recently grown impulsive. He stared down at his cuff, where the faint crescent of ink had dried like a faint bruise. He folded his hands over it. "We argued. She sent me away." "Over what point?" Poirot murmured. "Over everything," Giles snapped. "Over the estate, the charities, Davenport and his ridiculous schemes, the house itself. She believed Ravenscar should—" He drew in a breath that shuddered once, controlled it. "It does not matter now." "On the contrary," Poirot said softly, "it matters very much." Giles pushed back his chair. "If you mean to accuse me, do it plainly." "I am exhausted." "Fatigue is an admirable honesty," Poirot replied. "Tell me only this. When you left the study, was the window fastened?" Giles blinked. "Ah, yes, I believe so." "You believe?" "I did not attend to it. I left in anger." Grant dismissed him with a nod, and Giles went out without a glance for the tea. Hastings leaned toward Poirot. "Well?" "A man may close a door in anger," Poirot said, "but he seldom checks a latch. Anger untidies. Do you believe him?" "I believe he is a brother," Poirot said. "It is not the same thing." Veronica Vale entered like a quiet note in a room of wrong chords. She wore a dark wrap now. The plume at her temple was gone. Without the feathers, she looked younger and more severe. "Miss Vale," Grant began, "your position at midnight." "By the piano," she said. Her voice had the steadiness of someone who knows how to take breath in a crisis. I had just set my glass down. "I remember the condensation ring. And before midnight?" "I sang for Lady Helena earlier in the evening in the blue salon. A small request. She said it brought her luck to hear Porgy Amor before a celebration." Veronica's mouth flickered. "I told her it was a poor choice for luck." "You knew Lady Helena well?" Poirot asked. "We were acquainted," she said carefully. "Years ago I sang in Leeds. Her husband was a patron. After he died she invited me every season." "Every season, and yet this evening your eyes did not go to the body," Poirot said gently. "They went to the stairs." Veronica's hands tightened on the wrap. "Because something fell, a ribbon. I noticed it earlier, snagged on the pillar. It was crimson." "The color of your gown is ivory," Poirot observed. "And your fan?" "I left it in the cloakroom," Veronica said. "It has seen better days." She hesitated. "A feather came loose this week." "Black?" "Yes," she said. "Lady Helena teased me, said I was molting." Grant cleared his throat. "Did you visit Lady Helena's study tonight?" "For a moment," Veronica admitted. "Before the ball, she asked me to sign a cheque. She had lent me funds once, long ago, when I was ill. I paid her back 2 years ago. Tonight she pressed me to accept another patronage. I declined. You declined money. Grant's brows rose. Yes, her gaze did not waver, because I am not the woman I was when I needed it. She was making amends for something that was not her fault. Poirot's head tipped. Not her fault? Veronica looked at her hands. Her husband was kind and foolish. It is a dangerous combination. She stood. Will there be much more, Inspector? I would like to be alone. Grant dismissed her. When the door closed, Hastings exhaled, baffled. She's hiding something. Of course, Poirot said. But perhaps what she hides is not a dagger. Perhaps it is pride. Charles Davenport swaggered in with less swagger than usual. His golden mask dangled from his fingertips like a trinket, now offensive to the hand. Mr. Davenport, Grant said. I opposition at midnight. By the bar, Charles returned, speaking with the band leader about tempo. The waltz had, he made a vague conducting gesture. Dragged. The band leader confirms, Grant said, but he thinks you joined him only at the last chime. Charles's smile thinned. Musicians are notoriously inattentive to clocks. Unlike financiers, Poirot murmured. You are precise. When it matters. And the matter of Ravenscar, does it matter? Poirot's tone was light. You have business with the estate. A proposal, Charles said shortly. A lease of certain lands for development. Approved? Under discussion. His eyes flitted away. Lady Helena was undecided. I am told there was to be a new codicil. He stopped. Oui, Poirot said. The word makes itself known, does it not? Charles's jaw worked. I don't see what that has to do with a tragedy none of us will ever forget. It is often the tragedy we remember least precisely, Poirot said. Tell me, Mr. Davenport, do you miss any jewellery? Jewellery? The cufflink, perhaps, gold. Poirot's gaze slipped to Charles's wrists. One cuff flashed a sunburst. The other was fastened with a plain mother-of-pearl button. Charles's lips compressed. I mislaid it earlier. The floor in that ballroom eats things. Like a crocodile, Poirot said mildly. Bon, you may send a valet to look in the morning. Charles hesitated at the door. If you are implying... I imply nothing, Poirot said, smiling. I collect. Amelia Clark came last among the four. A pale figure with her swan mask held to her like a shield she had forgotten to lower. Mrs. Whitlow hovered in the doorway, maternal and alert, until Amelia, with a small nod, sent her away, Miss Clark, Grant said more gently than with the others. You told us you felt faint and moved toward the terrace. Yes, Amelia whispered. I could not breathe. Why? She twisted the ribbon of her mask, the ribbon that was not crimson now but white. The torn red must have belonged to another gown, another mask, some other guest. But Poirot's eye drifted to the inside of Amelia's left wrist, where the faintest shadow of rouge had smudged. Not blood. The cosmetic of hurried touch. Everything felt heavy, she said. I do not like masks. You are engaged to Mr. Davenport, Grant said. Amelia nodded, eyes down. And yet you looked not toward him when the lady fell, but toward Dr. Ashcroft, Poirot said. Very soft, Amelia's chin lifted, startled. And then, betraying herself, she coloured. Because he did not move, she said, and the words came too fast. Because it was strange. Poirot folded his gloves. And before midnight? Where were you then, say at 11:30? She hesitated. Answer, if you please, Grant said, though not unkindly. I went to the north corridor, Amelia said finally. It is quiet there. I wished for air. Near the study? Poirot asked. I don't know, Amelia said quickly. I was only walking. I did not open any doors, she swallowed. I heard voices once. Whose? I could not say. Could not, Poirot repeated, or will not. Her eyes filled. Does it matter? Lady Helena is... She pressed the swan mask to her chest as if it were a shield that might yet be made to function. I liked her. She said she wished me to decide things for myself. About Mr. Davenport? Poirot asked. A long pause. About my future. Bon, Poirot said very gently. That is all for now. When she had gone, Hastings blew out a breath he seemed to have been holding for an hour. Each of them has a reason to hate the party, he muttered. Giles and the estate. Davenport and his lease. Veronica and some old shame. Amelia and, well, perhaps the lease again by marriage, and the jester who could be anyone, or no one, Poirot said. A costume is a very simple method for being two places at once. Grant rubbed his eyes. I'd like to find that costume. We will, Poirot said. Costumes crave closets. He stood as if a small weight had rolled into place in his mind. There is a thing I must see. The third stair, the feather, the cufflink, the draught at the window. Each of these speaks, but in a different accent. And there is the matter of the glass that rolled. Hastings blinked. The champagne? Oui, it rolled down the steps as Lady Helena fell. Poirot's gaze sharpened. We will find whether it rolled freely, mon ami, or whether a little hand gave it the encouragement. Grant gathered the statements. And in the meantime? In the meantime, Poirot said, we shall look for the place in a house where one may hang a laughing man and make him disappear. He moved to the door, then paused, head cocked. The faintest chime sounded somewhere along the east wing corridor, the bare whisper of a bell kissed by a draught. Listen, Poirot said. Hastings frowned. I hear nothing. Precisely, Poirot murmured. The jester keeps very quiet, but Ravenscar itself does not. He smiled, a small, satisfied thing. Come, let us ask the library whether it has been entertaining guests it did not list. And as they stepped into the corridor, the house gave one of its tiny involuntary sighs, the kind old houses make when they know a secret is being followed. Chapter 7. The clues assemble. The library at Ravenscar kept the smell of old paper the way a chapel keeps incense. Leather spines marched in brown and burgundy ranks. The lamps were shaded in green glass. The carpet swallowed sound. Poirot paused just inside the threshold, drew a breath and let the quiet tell him what it wished. Observe, Hastings, he murmured. The room that pretends to have stayed still. Inspector Grant shut the door softly behind them. You think the jester came through here? Not the jester, Inspector, Poirot said. A jester. Whether man or costume we shall see. They crossed to the hearth. The fire had sunk low. A faint ash lifted at each step of air from the chimney. Above the mantel, a portrait of some Ashcroft ancestor gazed out with chilly benevolence. On the fender lay a pair of brass tongs, and beneath them, scarcely visible, a tiny bell, no larger than a thimble, its loop snapped clean. Hastings bent. A bell! From a cap that jingled, Poirot said. He did not touch it. He only looked, and then he looked at the soot, where an arc traced a clean crescent, something recently lifted, something roughly the shape of a hat. The jester's cap was warmed by the fire, Poirot murmured. To dry or to soften a shape? Grant frowned. Why soften it? To crush it smaller for a box, perhaps, Poirot said. Or a drawer. He turned toward the far wall, where bookcases met in a right-angled alcove. A ladder on rails had been left slightly out of true. Above, midway up the case, one book sat 2 millimeters proud of its neighbors. Poirot climbed 3 rungs, pressed the book spine with a finger, and felt the faint click of an old, well-oiled thing. A seam whispered open behind the ladder. No grand swing, merely a polite yielding of panel to panel, creating a slit of darkness the width of a man's shoulders. Hastings exhaled. A passage. Not the great romance of a passage, Poirot said, pleased, but a practical one. For servants once, perhaps. For mischief tonight. Grant produced his torch and played a careful beam within, scrubbed boards, a handrail, the faint scuff of recent shoes. And, 6 steps in, a smear no wider than a thumb on the rail, dark, glossy when the light struck. Ink? Grant asked. Or a cousin, Poirot said, but ink is a tidy man's carelessness. He let the panel ease back into place and descended. We will not follow now. It is enough to know that one may slip from room to room without braving the ballroom's eyes. Hastings had drifted to a club chair near the windows. Hello, he said. What do you make of this? Draped along the back of the chair, half concealed by a folded newspaper, hung a motley of diamonds, black and white, stitched on satin. A jester's sleeve. The cuff was stiff where something had dried, and when Hastings held his fingers away they were smudged with a faint reddish brown. Careful, Grant said, reaching for a handkerchief. He lifted the fabric by a clean corner and laid it across a side table. The sleeve's inner seam was torn as if wrenched hurriedly. Threads bristled like whiskers. Blood? Hastings asked, uneasy. Perhaps a ghost of it, Poirot said. Or wine, or... He sniffed delicately. A preparation that is neither. Look, he pointed to the edge of the cuff where a sheen lay that was not the dull of drying stain, but the faint waxy gloss of something oily. A residue, he said. On the rail in the passage there is ink. On the cuff there is... not ink. We will keep the mind open. Grant nodded. We'll have it tested when the road opens. He looked around. Where's the rest of the costume? Costumes, Poirot said, are shy when they are guilty. He moved to a tall armoire in the corner, the sort of furniture meant for blankets. The handle gave at once. Inside, neatly folded, a tunic of the same diamond pattern, a pair of soft-soled slippers, a second sleeve torn free, and a cap without its full share of bells. A faint scent rose, powdery, not floral. Hastings wrinkled his nose. Not perfume. No, Poirot said. Stage powder. A dust you use to dull a face under strong light. Our Miss Vale would know it well, but powder travels, like gossip. It does not prove ownership, it proves nearness. Grant took a slow breath. So the jester changed here. Came in through the panel, hid the cap by the fire to dry, stowed the tunic, left in a hurry with the sleeve off. Why tear a sleeve? To leave a trail, Poirot said lightly, or to remove a trail if a cuff is stained and you must cross a room of lamps. You prefer a clean arm. He turned toward the carpet and crouched. The slippers, he said. Soft soles, yes, but not silent, not on a threadbare runner. Hastings squinted. You can hear that? My little friend, Poirot said, amused. I hear the silk talk when it is anxious. Come. They returned to the great hall, now emptied of guests, and mounted the staircase. Poirot stopped at the third step from the bottom. The faint smear was still there, a blush of colour against stone. Grant held his torch low. Wine? Smell, Inspector, Poirot said. Grant bent, cautious. Not wine. Something sweet. Poirot's gaze went to the banister. He drew from his pocket a folded scrap of paper, touched it to the underside of the rail, then held it up. A dull shine. Beeswax, he said. A polish applied recently, and not with a cloth but with the finger. Hastings blinked. Why would anyone polish the underside of a banister? To make it smooth, Poirot said, very smooth, so that an object placed upon the stair could roll more obediently. A glass, perhaps, n'est-ce pas? The hand oils the rail, the glass is set, the moment is theatrical. At midnight the glass rolls when the hand lets it go. Grant studied him. Why roll the glass? To draw the eye? To fix the time, Inspector, Poirot said. To make everyone remember the chime because they remember the roll. And to bring the little crowd forward, away from the second and third stair, while... He glanced at the slender puncture of memory in the linen sheet below. While a quiet thing is done with a wrist. Hastings shivered. I don't like it. It is not for liking, Poirot said. It is for understanding. He straightened. Now the feather. He took from his pocket the envelope and shook the black plume into his palm. We will ask the fan if it is missing a friend. They found Veronica Vale in the blue salon alone without her wrap. She looked as if she had not decided whether to grieve or to sing. At sight of the feather in Poirot's hand, one eyebrow rose a fraction. May I? Poirot asked, gesturing to the fan on the console. She nodded. He unfolded the fan, a beautiful thing once, its ebony sticks carved with vines, its plumes frayed at the root. Along the spine, tiny brass ferrules gripped each quill. One slot was gapped. Poirot offered up the feather and tried the fit. It slid not in the gap, but into the slot beside where the ferrule had been bent minutely wider. Not this feather, Poirot said pleasantly, but a sister of it, perhaps removed earlier. Veronica's mouth moved. I told you. It has been shedding. Oui. And who mended it for you? She hesitated. Lady Helena's maid. I asked Mrs. Whitlow for help this afternoon. Bon, Poirot said, folding the fan. I shall speak to the maid. He left her with a grave nod and returned, with Hastings to the morning room, where Inspector Grant had spread their small harvest. The bell, the sleeve with its sleek residue, the torn twin, the soft slippers, the hint of ink from the passage rail on a square of linen, a cufflink of gold sunburst recovered from beneath a chair, and Hastings's list of positions at midnight. Let us put them in their places, Poirot said, delighted, as if arranging a chess problem. The glass that rolled, staged to mark the stroke of 12 and to pull eyes forward. Evidence, beeswax under the banister, the smear on the third stair, the remembered sound. 2. The wrist, punctured by a neat implement, no struggle, death gentle and deliberate. The feather, placed beside the body like a flourish, a prop available in the house, box of plumes, not necessarily from Miss Vale's fan. 4. The jester costume, altered and stowed in the library, cap warmed, one bell lost, sleeve torn, residue on the cuff that is not mere wine, powder scent. The passage, panel from library to somewhere in the east wing, fresh scuff and ink trace. Faz, the ink on Giles's cuff, consistent with desk work, also with the rail. The missing cufflink, Davenport's, found in the hall where it could have been lost by clumsiness, or while arranging a theatrical role. Grant tapped the list with his pencil. You're building toward someone. I am building toward a method, Poirot said. The someone will present himself when the method refuses others, Hastings pointed. What about Amelia? She heard voices, and you noticed the smudge on her wrist. The smudge is rouge, Poirot said. It says haste, not guilt. As to voices, those in corridors are like those in dreams. They tell you only that the house was not sleeping. Veronica and the powder. Grant asked. A singer knows powder, Poirot said. So does a lady's maid. So does any guest who borrows a mirror and dabs at a shine. The powder is a traveller. Grant sat back. Giles and Davenport, then. Ink and cufflink. Perhaps, Poirot said. But let us not forget the simplest trick in a house of masks, an exchange. Clareman may jingle to the left while his sleeve clean lifts a glass to the right. He stood. One more thing, the maid. They found Elspeth, a small, sharp woman with a pale plait in the linen room counting towels by willpower alone. She bobbed when Mr. Keene introduced Poirot and folded her hands like a penitent. You assisted Miss Vale with her fan, Poirot said. Kind. Yes, sir. This afternoon. The ferrule was loose. I mended it with a dab of glue and a touch of wax to help the stick slide. Beeswax? Poirot asked. The same, sir, as for the banisters, she said, then winced. I polish on Thursdays. Did you polish this evening? No, sir. She looked miserable. But the young gentleman, Mr. Davenport, he asked for a bit for his cuff. He said it squeaked. Her brow crumpled. Do cuffs squeak, sir? Only when they are very dramatic, Poirot said gently. He nodded thanks and left her with a smile that lifted her like a hand. Back in the hall, Hastings' eyes were wide. Cuffs don't squeak. He asked for beeswax. Oui, Poirot said. And where does one put beeswax when one has no cloth? On the finger. They stared together at the banister's underside, where the dull shine caught the lamp's low light. Grant blew out a breath. Davenport. Do not rush, Inspector, Poirot said, though the pleasure in his voice had sharpened. He wished a glass to roll. That is true. He wished attention to look the other way. That is true. But a rolling glass does not kill a lady. It only hides the moment when she dies. For the death we must have the little wound and the thing that made it, needle, thorn, the slender knife. And that, he looked toward the east wing where the panel had breathed at his touch, may yet be in the room that keeps its promises poorly. A low wind slid along the corridor, fingering the doors. Somewhere above, a hinge spoke once and fell silent. Poirot's eyes narrowed, thoughtful, almost amused. Come, my friends, he said softly. The house will show us one more thing before dawn, where a jester sleeps when he does not wish to be found. And with that, he turned toward the east wing again, leading them by lamplight through Ravenscar's long breath. following the faintest ribbon of cold air as though it were a thread only he could see. Chapter 8. The hidden passage, the east wing of Ravenscar Manor, was a place where time had grown tired. The carpet along the corridor was worn thin at the edges, the wallpaper bleached by old winters, the sconces shrouded in cobweb veils that trembled as the storm whispered against the walls outside. Poirot walked slowly, holding a lantern at waist height. The air was colder here, the sort of cold that clings to stone and remembers footsteps. Hastings followed close behind, and Inspector Grant brought up the rear with his torch, the beam cutting across faded portraits of long-dead Ashcrofts, who seemed to watch in silence. "I don't like this, Poirot," Hastings muttered. "It feels like walking into the inside of a throat." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Mais oui, mon ami. That is how secrets wish to be found, reluctantly." At the end of the corridor, a narrow servant's stair climbed sharply upward toward the attics, but Poirot paused at the wall to the right. Plain plaster, faintly cracked. He pressed his palm to it and closed his eyes. "Feel this," he said softly. Hastings touched the wall. A thin draught whispered through a nearly invisible seam. Poirot stepped back, examining the moulding. "The bookcase panel in the library opened into a passage," he murmured. "This is where it speaks again." With a delicate push, he found a loose brass hook near the baseboard and turned it. There was a muffled click, then the wall itself sighed open. A narrow black slit revealing a spiral of old wooden stairs descending into darkness. Grant muttered under his breath. "Of course. Every cursed manor has its ghosts." Poirot smiled faintly. "No, Inspector. Not ghosts. Shortcuts. They descended single file." The steps creaked softly, old but well used. Hastings kept glancing over his shoulder, certain that at any moment a bell might jingle behind them. At the bottom, the stair opened into a cramped stone corridor, low-ceilinged and lit only by Poirot's lantern. The air smelled of damp earth and something metallic, faint but sharp. Poirot crouched and ran his finger lightly along the floor. "You see, Hastings, the dust here has been disturbed recently. The prints are soft-soled, like the slippers in the library." Grant's torch caught a faint shimmer on the wall. A single black feather was snagged in a cobweb, twisting gently in the draught. The passage curved sharply left and opened behind a small tapestry door in the cloakroom, only 20 feet from the grand staircase. Poirot brushed the door aside and stepped out, into the heart of the house again. "Mon Dieu," Hastings breathed. "A person could have slipped from the ballroom, through the library, and come out here, unseen." "Oui," Poirot replied softly. "And so perhaps they did." They examined the cloakroom. Shelves lined the walls with hats, wraps, and cloaks. In the corner, beneath a folded riding coat, lay a small black valise, half hidden. Poirot knelt, snapped the clasps, and opened it. Inside, a glass syringe of fine make, a vial of clear liquid, labelled only with the chemist's stamp from London, a scrap of crimson ribbon, a white handkerchief, folded precisely, embroidered with the initials C.D. Grant whistled low. "Davenport, perhaps," Poirot said. "Or perhaps someone wishes us to see Davenport." Hastings stared at the syringe. "Do you think this is how—" Poirot nodded. The wound on Lady Helena's wrist was too neat for a knife. A needle, yes. A clever one. And the rolling glass, that was not to kill her. It was to mark the second it happened. He wrapped the syringe carefully in his handkerchief, then examined the valise more closely. On its underside, faint and greasy, was a fingerprint smeared with beeswax. "Our theatrical friend again," Poirot murmured. Before they left the cloakroom, Poirot knelt to inspect the floor. The faintest trace of moisture led back toward the tapestry door, as though someone, after their work, had come through here into the passage. Someone who had no desire to meet the crowd. They re-entered the corridor and followed the prints back to a fork in the passage they hadn't seen before. One branch continued straight to the library. The other angled upward toward the attics. Poirot paused at the junction, tilting his head like a man listening to music only he could hear. "A criminal who is clever," he said softly, "does not keep their tools near their crime. They hide them above the heads of others." He began to climb. The attic smelled of dust, pine, and old linens. The roof beams groaned softly under the wind. It was the kind of place children imagine monsters sleep. In the far corner, beneath a slanted beam, hung the jester's tunic, freshly washed, still damp, the black diamonds darker with moisture. The bells were missing. Beside it lay the jester's mask, face down on a trunk. The painted grin cracked down the center. Someone wanted to erase this costume, Grant muttered. Not erase, Poirot corrected gently. Delay discovery. It is the difference between panic and precision. Hastings pointed at the tunic. But if Davenport left the syringe, why bring the costume up here? Why not throw it away? Because, Poirot said, costumes are useful when you must be two people at once, and when you must be no one at all. He lifted the mask carefully. Inside the painted grin, a faint smear of foundation powder clung to the rim. Poirot tapped it gently, and the dust fell like snow. Stage powder again, he murmured. It follows us like an echo. Downstairs, the storm broke into a brief silence. The house seemed to be holding its breath. Poirot looked at the costume, the syringe, the secret corridor, and the crimson ribbon. One piece after another, the puzzle was arranging itself, not loudly, but with the quiet certainty of something inevitable. Hastings, he said softly, a murder is like a waltz. One step leads to the next, even when the dancers believe they are free. Hastings frowned. And you've heard the tune? Poirot's moustache twitched with a thin smile. I'm beginning to hear its refrain. Chapter 9. The Reveal. The drawing room at Ravenscar was grand in the way old English rooms so often are, a fire crackling beneath a heavy mantel, dark walnut paneling, velvet curtains pulled tight against the night. By now the storm had retreated to a sullen drizzle. The hour was past 4 in the morning. Tired faces, pale and drawn, gathered around the long rug like pieces on a board. Poirot stood before the hearth with his hands folded behind his back. Inspector Grant sat to one side, his notebook balanced on his knee. Hastings leaned against the wall, trying not to yawn, but too uneasy to sleep. One by one, the guests took their seats. Dr. Giles Ashcroft, shoulders stiff, eyes still red with a brother's fury. Veronica Vale, pale but composed, her ivory gown shadowed with fatigue. Charles Davenport, immaculate in his waistcoat, though the golden cufflink at his left wrist no longer had its match. Amelia Clark, small and quiet, clutching her shawl as though it were armor. And, a little apart, Mrs. Whitlow and Mr. Keene, the housekeeper and butler, faces set like carved wood. On a nearby table sat the black valise, the jester's mask, and the feather, each placed as neatly as evidence in a court. Poirot surveyed the room with quiet satisfaction. Then, in a voice barely louder than the whisper of the fire, he began, Mesdames, Messieurs, tonight, death came to Ravenscar Manor as softly as a feather falling upon stone. No cry, no struggle, no clumsy violence, only a small wound on the wrist of Lady Helena Ashcroft, and a single glass that rolled down the staircase at the stroke of midnight. A shiver passed through the room. But this was not a crime of passion. No, this was a performance, planned with care. A glass polished with beeswax to ensure its role. A feather placed like a signature. A costume worn not to amuse but to vanish. Poirot paced gently as he spoke. He never raised his voice. He let silence build its own weight. First, let us consider the time of death. Midnight, everyone remembers the glass rolling down the staircase. That was the intention, to make you all remember it. While you watched, a needle pierced Lady Helena's wrist. The poison was fast. She fell almost gracefully, as if it were part of the evening's entertainment. He turned toward Charles Davenport, whose knuckles whitened around his knee. Monsieur Davenport asked the maid for beeswax earlier in the night, not because his cuff squeaked as he claimed, because he needed to make the underside of the banister smooth, to ensure the glass would roll precisely when he wished it to. This is not the act of a frightened man. It is the act of a careful one. Charles's mouth tightened. That proves nothing. A bit of wax doesn't make me a murderer. Poirot lifted a hand. But of course, monsieur, beeswax alone does not kill. The syringe in the cloakroom, however. He gestured to the valise on the table. Inside, we found the syringe and the vial of poison. On the handle, a waxed fingerprint. On the handkerchief, your initials. I didn't, Charles began. Non, do not hurry to defend what I have not yet accused, Poirot interrupted softly. It is true these things may have been placed to point to you, But Hercule Poirot does not stop at the first feather he sees. He turned his gaze now to the others. The hidden passage connects the library to the cloakroom. Anyone in this house could have slipped away from the ballroom, put on the jester costume, administered the poison unseen, and returned in silence. The jester was the perfect mask. No one looked too closely. It was only entertainment. He paused, letting the weight of the words fall on each face. Who among you had reason to fear Lady Helena's signature on a new will? Dr. Ashcroft. She was preparing to give away a large portion of the estate. Veronica Vale, she once funded your recovery. Davenport, your lease hung on her approval. Amelia, she might have cut your engagement short had she chosen to change her mind. Giles rose halfway from his chair. You can't mean... Poirot lifted one finger. I mean only that each of you had a motive, but only one had the means, the opportunity, and the patience to turn murder into theatre. He walked to the table, picked up the jester's mask, and turned it in his hands. The costume was hidden in the attic, rinsed but not clean. Its sleeve bore the faint trace of a sweet oil, the same used to prepare the syringe. And inside this mask we found stage powder. A subtle clue, because not everyone here uses such powder. His eyes moved finally to Veronica Vale. The opera singer did not flinch. I told you. I used powder before I arrived. That means nothing. Non, Poirot agreed. On its own, nothing. But the sleeve was also torn and the bells removed. A woman could wear this costume over her gown, slip through the library passage, and no one would recognize her. The room stilled. Even the fire crackled more softly. Veronica Vale, Poirot said gently, you loved Lady Helena's husband once. He supported you when you were ill. And though she forgave you, you never forgave yourself. Tonight, Lady Helena wished to change her will again, to give you a stipend you did not want. You refused, but you also knew she would announce the change at midnight after the toast. Veronica's lips parted. Her hands clenched. She was going to make you her beneficiary, mademoiselle, Poirot continued, his voice like silk. In a single signature, she would tie you forever to her memory, a woman who prides herself on standing alone. She could not allow it, so you chose a more permanent refusal. I didn't, Veronica whispered, but it was weak. Poirot placed the mask gently on the table. The powder in the mask was yours. The feather from the box was yours. The costume could be pulled on quickly, and you were the only one in this house with the calm and precision to administer a needle unseen. For on stage, you have spent years striking your mark unseen by the audience. Hastings' voice broke the silence. But the beeswax, as that was Davenport? Poirot's eyes twinkled with cold amusement. Davenport prepared the staircase. He wanted a distraction, perhaps to overhear Lady Helena's decision, perhaps to manipulate the room. But he did not kill. He was a fool. But not a murderer. Charles exhaled shakily. Veronica didn't move. The costume was damp because Veronica washed it after the act. She entered the passage, slipped back into the cloakroom, discarded the syringe in Davenport's bag to frame him, and returned to the ballroom just as the glass reached the bottom of the stair. A clean performance, no? The fire hissed softly. Amelia's hand trembled against her shawl. Giles said nothing at all. Veronica sat very straight, her voice a thread. She wanted to own me. Even in her death she would have made me a charity case. Poirot inclined his head not unkindly. Murder is seldom about what people do. It is about what they make us feel. Inspector Grant rose, expression grim but steady. Veronica Vale, I must caution you. She closed her eyes. I didn't mean for it to be ugly. She didn't even fight, Poirot's voice softened. Of course not. She trusted you. And with that, the masquerade was truly over. As Grant led Veronica away, Poirot stood before the quiet fire. Hastings approached him, shaken. Poirot, I can't believe it. All this just to avoid inheriting. Poirot's moustache twitched sadly. People will do terrible things, mon ami, not only to gain richer, but to reject them. Pride can be as sharp as a blade. He looked once more at the black feather on the table. The grin of the mask seemed smaller now, less triumphant. Just tired. The performance ends, Poirot said softly, but the stage remembers every step. Outside, dawn broke over the wet moors. Ravenscar Manor stood silent, and in the quiet morning light its secrets finally stood unmasked. Chapter 10. Justice at dawn. The rain had tired of itself by morning. A rinse light lay across the moors, and Ravenscar Manor seemed less a fortress than an old animal, breathing slowly after a long night. The storm's tantrum had left small offerings in the gravel. Twigs, leaves, a single bell shaken loose from the eaves. In the breakfast room, a discreet tray waited, tea cooling in its silver pot, toast untouched. Mrs. Whitlow moved through the house with red eyes and correct hands. Mr. Keene spoke in a whisper, even where whispers were not required. Servants, like houses, know how to grieve without making a scene. Inspector Grant had done what could be done before the road opened. Veronica Vale, silent and very straight, sat behind the closed door of the morning room with a constable outside. Giles had not slept. He had walked the corridors until the walking did not help, and then sat in the chapel with his hands folded as if at school. Davenport smoked in the conservatory and did not finish a single cigarette. Amelia, pale as winter glass, wrote a letter and tore it up, then another and kept it. Hastings found Poirot in the gallery, looking out over the lawns, where a thin mist clung to the earth like a habit it could not yet surrender. "You've not slept," Hastings said. "No," Poirot answered, as if sleep were a social engagement. He had declined. "But the little grey cells, they rest when the pattern is correct." Hastings stood beside him. "It's a hard pattern. I still can't make it square with my feelings." Poirot's eyes were kind. "You wish murderers to look like murderers. It is natural, mon ami, but often they look like people who could not bear, even one more day, the thing they believe is being done to them." He paused. "It is a foolish belief, mais oui, but a powerful one. Do you think she will speak again?" Hastings asked softly. "Confess?" "Properly." "She has already confessed to herself," Poirot said. "The rest is paperwork." They went down together. In the hall the sheet had been lifted from Lady Helena. The doctor had come and gone. The staircase stood as it had before midnight, banister polished, steps innocent, a modest stage with the scenery struck. Giles Ashcroft appeared on the landing and descended slowly. He stopped before Poirot, searching his face for something that was not there. "Do I thank you?" Giles asked at last. "It seems indecent." "You thank the inspector," Poirot said gently. "I am only the concierge who shows the truth to its room." Giles's mouth twitched, the shadow of a smile or the memory of one. "She was a difficult woman. She was my sister." "Yes," Poirot said simply. Giles looked toward the study door. "Her solicitor will come today. The codicil, do you know?" "I know only that it tried to be born," Poirot replied. "Whether it would have lived is for the law to decide." He hesitated. "Dr. Ashcroft, if there is any comfort, I believe Lady Helena chose what she chose not to punish the living, but to appease the dead. We are sometimes extravagant, we humans, when offering gifts to ghosts." Giles nodded once, the kind of nod that is both acceptance and surrender, and walked away. Amelia approached next, clutching her shawl. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, "will you tell me something? Not about the case. About choice." She swallowed. "When everything feels as if it is decided for you, how do you decide anything at all?" Poirot regarded her with grave affection. "Mademoiselle, you begin with the smallest thing that is yours. Not a fortune, not a marriage. A morning, a walk. The letter you send or do not send. One choice makes the next less heavy." He tilted his head. "Today, you will have tea with Mrs. Whitlow in the kitchen, and eat one of the little buns she hides in the tin. You will not discuss Mr. Davenport. Tomorrow you will take the early train." Amelia stared, then gave a startled, watery laugh. "Yes, monsieur." She curtsied absurdly, charmingly, and fled before any tears could betray her. Hastings watched her go. "You've arranged her life." "No," Poirot said. "I have arranged her breakfast. That is much safer." By mid-morning the road was deemed passable. A motor-car coughed at the front steps. The village constable stood ready. Papers were signed beneath Inspector Grant's patient eye. Veronica Vale, still in calm, rose when asked, and did not falter as she crossed the hall. She did not look at anyone she had known in the house, not even the portrait of Lady Helena that watched from its gilded frame. At the door, she paused, not for drama, but for breath. Poirot, a step aside, inclined his head. Neither friend nor judge, she returned the gesture, as one artist bows to another whose craft she recognizes, if not admires. When the car had gone and the house had swallowed the quiet it left behind, Grant joined Poirot at the foot of the stairs. "You never said what the poison was," the inspector remarked. "You had a notion. A barbiturate in a cunning measure," Poirot said. "Sleep delivered too quickly to a tired heart. A singer would know what calms the nerves, what slows the pulse. Increase the dose. You do not calm. You cancel." He lifted a shoulder. "But whether chemist or coffin tells us the label, the sorrow is the same," Grant sighed. "I don't like that she used Davenport as a screen." "Neither does Davenport," Poirot said dryly. "But every stage requires scenery. Let him consider in future whether he wishes to provide it." Grant's mouth curved. "You're a hard man, Monsieur Poirot." "I'm an economical man," Poirot corrected. "I dislike waste, in violence and in foolishness." Mr. Keene approached to ask about rooms and departures, and whether lunch should be laid. Poirot deferred to Hastings with an airy wave, which Hastings accepted in the spirit intended. "Tea in the train for us," Hastings decided. "No lunch." "I have had quite enough of banquets." "Very wise," Poirot said. They took their coats in the cloakroom, beside the peg where the jester's tunic had not hung, where a secret door had admitted a masquerade no one had paid to see. Poirot paused and touched the panel lightly with his palm. "Every house has its little lies," he said. "It is polite to pretend one does not notice, until one must." Outside, the air smelled of wet grass and forgives. A weak sun fretted with the clouds, trying to be brave. The car waited. Mr. Keene and Mrs. Whitlow, with the united dignity of their trade, bid farewell in a manner that accorded gratitude without admitting to debt. On the drive down to the village, the hedgerows glittered faintly, ornamented with the night's last raindrops. Hastings, who had meant to be sensible, grew sentimental instead. "Poirot," he said suddenly, "do you ever tire of it? The ugliness underneath the elegance." Poirot looked out through the windscreen, where the lane unspooled like a ribbon that had made peace with its knots. "No," he said after a moment, "because there is something else underneath the ugliness." "What's that?" "The shape," Poirot said. "When the pattern becomes clear, even sorrow has its dignity. One restores the room to order. One replaces the chair where it belongs. One closes the window that the storm forced open." He smiled faintly. "It is a small thing, order, but the soul sleeps better for it." At the little station, the mist tugged at their ankles like a child reluctant to be left. The porter, with the smile of a man who has heard rumors and chosen none of them, took their cases. The train's engine ticked and breathed, impatient to be moving. Hastings climbed into the compartment and turned back. "Coming, Poirot." "In a moment," Poirot said. He stood alone for a few seconds on the platform, listening to the far-off sob of a curlew and the nearer clank of couplings. He thought of a glass rolling down a stair, of a feather's black question on grey stone, of a mask rinsed and left to dry like a conscience that would not. He thought of Lady Helena's hand, small now under the linen, and of a woman who had mistaken pride for freedom. He took off his hat to the morning. Then he stepped into the carriage, and the door shut with a neat little click that was very much to his taste. As the train pulled away, the manor dwindled to a silhouette atop the moor, and then to nothing at all. But Poirot's eyes were content. The pattern, if not beautiful, was complete. "Sleep, Hastings," he said, arranging the rug across his friend's knees. "This was a story for those who go to bed while the mystery continues. We for once shall do as they do." Hastings laughed softly and let his eyes close. The carriage swayed. The countryside unrolled. And the small, immaculate man with the waxed moustache watched the world go by as if it were an answer he had earned. The day ticked forward. Somewhere far behind them, a house began the slow, honest work of becoming itself again. And so, mes amis, the night at Ravenscar came to an end. A feather, a glass, and a mask had told their story. If only someone would listen. If you enjoyed this mystery, don't forget to subscribe for more full-length Hercule Poirot stories, designed to keep your mind curious. And your nights calm bonne nuit, and may your dreams be filled only with puzzles that can be solved.